So I re-welcome you, and to those we haven't had the chance to work with, I look forward to more discussions with you after the panel. Luis already did such a great job, naming you each out from your respective parliaments. So I'll skip those pleasantries and jump right into such a delightful topic that I'm really happy to speak to everyone about and get your insights. Obviously here, I'm the moderator, you are the panelists with your insights. And once again, our title of our panel is the integration of mismatched systems in Parliament. What a fascinating and relevant and pertinent topic I think we could all relate to. And without further ado, I'll introduce the contemplation, the debate itself, and then I'll direct you each to your questions to answer. And with that, I'll just launch right into it. So as parliaments, we offer a myriad of services to our clients. These services span many industries, from legislative services to campus services, such as transportation, food and catering, facilities, etc., and corporate services, traditional human resources, financial, legal, etc. With such a diversity and breadth of service offering, systems are required by us as service providers to deliver more effectively and efficiently. In a world where our clients are expecting more seamless and integrated services, these mismatched user experiences and back-end compatibility issues can often pose increasing risk to the service expectations. As stewards of our parliaments, our pursuit must focus on improving the front-end experience of our clients while also finding ways to optimize business processes, data flows, back-end integrations of our mismatched systems. So with that, I'm going to launch into the first round of debate, for which we'll have 15 minutes, 3 minutes each if you're going to start your timers. And the first contemplation I'll bring forward is, what do our clients feel from the front? And that's what we've all been calling in our industries the user experience. So for an effective user experience design, UX design, to strive to create a seamless, enjoyable, and meaningful experience for our users, ultimately enhancing their satisfaction, engagement, and loyalty with our product and service, with distinct user experiences of each system our clients use, improve our services to offer more integrated and consistent experiences. So with that, I'll start with Fitsilis. Go ahead, Fotios, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chris, and indeed, what an interesting topic this is. Well, I've been in this IT business for decades now, and you can never invest enough in user experience. And when it comes to parliaments, there's an additional layer of complexity, because usually we can allow, let's say, certain freedoms to the developers to they can relate sometimes with a topic, but when it comes now to a representative institution, there's usually not a direct link. So in order to develop front-end systems that are really able to handle efficiently the requests that they're meant for, one needs to work very closely and over lengthy times with the parliamentary professionals. We have experienced in the past a lot of problematic implementations, and this is something we would like to avoid in future systems that, of course, involve also AI-based applications. So we have done, let's say, a previous experiment. This was an EU funded project, European Union funded project. So we had a multi-stakeholder support in implementing these systems. So we had universities, we had the private sector, and we had also the parliamentary professionals all together building and designing and working towards new systems for parliaments.
That's so great. Thank you, Fotios, for those insights and respecting the time, of course, as the moderator. I love that. Next, Sabrina, over to you.
I'm checking the time right now. All right. I really like this question. I like that we're starting off with the UX element in the context of this specific discussion. And I've said it many times before in Bússola discussions, and I maybe hammer it too much, but I keep talking about Conway's law, where you have sort of the structure of an organization that influences the design, the architecture of the system it builds. And that's true for public sector, it's true for private sector, large organizations, small organizations, because it makes sense. You don't necessarily give it a second thought. But what happens in that end is that doesn't necessarily make sense to the consumer of your services or the range of your services that might cut across those sort of boundaries of the systems that you design. And I think that improving services and specifically offering a better integrated or consistent UX experience, I think would be sort of part of a pivot to a service delivery or a customer experience orientation. UX design optimizes user interactions within sort of integrated systems, improves the efficiency of those business processes that are underlying, and sort of streamlines those workflows. And there are lots of dimensions to look at, but I think it's good to begin with this correct focus, which shouldn't necessarily be inward. And I think what it results in is a disconnect between people or systems or organizations that produce data and information and those who consume it. And I'd say that consumers are obviously the major factor to consider in this. And even before this, considering the extent to which we know our consumers and what they are seeking when they interact with our systems. And that's got to be sort of an intentional customer experience approach. And it should influence how those systems are designed and how much they're and how they're connected as well. And consumers of data or information are not necessarily a monolithic group either. You know, they could be citizens, they could be academics, they could be specialists of certain topics, students, industry, you know, software developers, machines, APIs. So there's a whole range of consumers, and I think that part of the discussion, the consideration in the UX front should be considering those consumers and how they interact with the data that you're producing. And I know I'm speaking from a very data perspective. And that's definitely sort of, I think, the very first step is know who your users are, canvas your users, and try to understand how they interact with systems, and that they doesn't necessarily match up with the way that you've set them up. And I think that's sort of the key step to beginning an integrated approach. And, you know, my expertise is in regulatory text, and, you know, there are sophisticated processes, it's highly tailored systems that are used for creating these. But then we sort of sometimes come across an integration cliff where, you know, the formats which they're created and managed are useful for the system itself, but maybe not so much for the consumer. And that's part of that discussion where you start broadening the conversation and start thinking about, well, this output that we're creating, is there anything missing from it from a consumer's perspective? And that's sort of, I'm up at my 3 minutes, but that's my pitch for the UX perspective.
Wow, Sabrina, always amazing insights. And yes, you caught the gist of the flow of the moderation is we put the users first. The UX comes first, because as creators and designers of systems, processes, we must always see those personas first as we tailor those experiences for them. So thank you for catching that drift in the presentation today. Over to Djaka. You have 3 minutes for your thoughts on this.
Ya, terima kasih. Saya kira kita sepakat ya bahwa aplikasi apapun sistem yang kita buat orientasinya ujungnya adalah kepada klien, kepada pelanggan gitu ya. Jadi dasarnya adalah itu. Jadi kita ciptakan untuk tentunya supaya pelanggan itu puas dan pesan yang kita sampaikan sampai gitu ya. Jadi seberapa canggihnya sistem yang ada, apabila itu tidak ramah kepada pelanggan, tidak sesuai dengan keinginan pelanggan, itu juga akan tidak bernilai gitu ya. Untuk itu maka DPR itu punya pengalaman ya. Kita kemarin itu kita lagi mempunyai program untuk melakukan redesign website kita. Website kita udah relatif agak lama ya, udah 5 tahun yang lalu, sehingga kita anggap perlu ada penyegaran. Untuk itu kita memang hire pihak ketiga untuk bisa membuat desain website yang benar-benar user friendly. Maka kita lakukan proses-prosesnya didahului dengan adanya survei ya. Ada survei kepada kira-kira pengguna website DPR itu siapa saja sih gitu. Dan keinginannya seperti apa. Dan juga pertanyaan-pertanyaan dikaitkan dengan desain yang sebelumnya ya. Yang sebelumnya itu diminta untuk memberikan pendapatnya gitu, responden atau klien itu tadi. Yang tadi bisa mahasiswa, bisa masyarakat, bisa kelompok-kelompok organisasi dan sebagainya. Dari hasil kajian itu maka kita mendapatkan informasi bahwa sebetulnya yang paling diharapkan masyarakat itu terkait dengan layanan aspirasi masyarakat. Yang berikutnya itu ada 43%. Yang berikutnya adalah informasi anggota Dewan. Dan juga terkait dengan berita-berita aktual yang ada di DPR serta informasi legislasi. Jadi ini menjadi penting data informasi yang diharapkan oleh klien, oleh pelanggan tadi sebagai dasar ketika kita untuk menyusun atau membuat melakukan redesign. Dan setelah itu pun juga ada proses UX ya, user experience untuk bisa lebih mendekatkan lagi sistem yang kita buat itu supaya bisa lebih seperti yang diharapkan oleh klien, oleh pelanggan kita. Karena hanya dengan cara seperti itu saya kira yang terus-menerus kita lakukan ya, kita review, kita perbaiki sehingga kita harapkan sistem aplikasi yang kita buat itu nanti bisa diterima dan apa yang kita harapkan, pesan-pesan yang kita harapkan itu bisa sampai juga. Saya kira itu, Christopher. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Djaka. Very, very insightful comments on how to address user experience. Without further ado, Jonathan, please, your thoughts on this.
Yep, I'll try to keep to the 3 minutes again, like everyone else. There's always a lot to talk about, especially when we look at user interface design. I'm a very sort of big advocate around keeping things simple, keeping things clean, and giving the people the information that they want in a meaningful manner. So, you know, I think I'll give you a sort of an example from, you know, a broadcasting solution as an example. So we were working with a customer and a parliament, and, you know, for them to actually go live with their live broadcast, you know, previously they had to hit, you know, maybe 20 different buttons. They had to change 20 different settings just to get a live stream out there. And, you know, we sort of showed them a different type of interface, you know, which we sort of put together for them. And it just consisted of 3 different buttons. It's like on, broadcast, stop. And they went, what else do we have to do? And we said, nothing. Like the rest of it's all taken care of. And, you know, I think fundamentally, you know, coming back down to what we call clean, elegant design, I think, you know, one of the sort of pitfalls around user interfaces is that people try to put absolutely everything on one bit of, you know, page, or, you know, absolutely so much data or so much information that it really becomes, you know, very hard to read or very hard to digest. So it's quite interesting, you know, when we look at that sort of thing, I think we look at consistency. And, you know, the other thing I look around user interfaces is choice. And I think, you know, we probably go into that a bit later in this debate as well, around choice of platform, or, you know, choice of device as an example. So making sure that your user interfaces do support choice. And also we had a debate yesterday as well around accessibility as well, making sure that, you know, interfaces are accessible.
Great job on the 3 minutes, Jonathan. And I love the 3 button analogy. It's keep it simple. And I'll never forget the first experience I created back in the day, I think it had about 100 buttons. So congratulations on getting down to 3. Okay, and last but definitely not least, Widjai, go ahead. Your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Christopher. It's always difficult to be the last because the best comments already have given, but they say there's always space for a little bit chocolate. What I want to comment on this question is user-centered design. We have to prioritize user-centered design principles throughout the design process. We have to understand the user's mental models, expectation, and behaviors, but also design interfaces that are intuitive and easy to navigate. That is what Jonathan already said. That will reduce the learning curve for users across different systems. But also what's important is the second thing is documentation and training. Provide comprehensive documentation and training for internal teams responsible for maintaining and updating the system that ensure that they follow the established design guidelines. That's my comment on these 2 things. As I said, the best comments already given. This just an add-on. Thank you.
Short but very sweet, as you mentioned, which I couldn't resist the pun. Thank you for that. Over in keeping with time, let's address our second round here. And we touched upon it a little bit. Sabrina mentioned the words business processes. You know, as we peel down the layers and we're going from the UX now to how we design our business processes across organizations, we must strive to integrate our mismatched systems across our parliament. And inevitably, we will see the need to integrate our business processes and workflows across service departments. Traditionally, our systems have often been associated with one specific service department's needs and not necessarily designed for parliamentary-wide business needs. What factors must we consider in harmonizing business processes to reduce mismatched systems? Starting with you, Sabrina, go ahead.
All right. So for this specific question, I guess it's kind of ricochets right back to the user experience, and integrating these systems and mapping out your business process, I think, doesn't only really involve the technical considerations and the processes, but also a deep understanding of how integration impacts users, organizations' process, user experience, and business process are interconnected, really. And I think they should be, insofar as it's possible, be considered together to try and sort of achieve the most harmonious or integrated system you possibly could. And I think there are lots of factors that we can look at from that perspective, especially when we're dealing with a lot of sort of single purpose systems that we want to try and weave together. And I think some of the approaches that you could easily start out with is collaborating across these organizations or across the different departments or silos that might exist within Parliament, for example. And again, this to a certain extent relates to this sort of Conway's law, where you're trying to break down that tendency to sort of single purpose design and single purpose create systems and start thinking about how you can connect them across organization. And one example of this comes to an engagement I was working on years ago that involved legislation drafting that was done by one centralized department. And I know it's not like that everywhere. And there's a structured format that really would have did allow in theory for a much easier and streamlined approach to managing the entire legislative life cycle. But that involved collaboration across several departments. And there was a certain point at which that was not achieved, which meant that you had to start factoring in sort of these workarounds and different paths to achieving what otherwise could have been integration had there been better collaboration. And, you know, for many reasons, these type of things happen. They can be political, they can be leadership, they can be budgetary. But that's why from the get-go, insofar as possible, having collaboration and sort of ideating as to how this is going to work across departments is fundamental. That involves mapping out your processing and trying to figure out, are we duplicating things? Are there things that we are, you know, copying and pasting? And that really does happen, especially when we think of data sharing. You know, we talk about, are we sharing data across departments? And you say, yes, we are. And that's awesome. Except what it turns out is that sometimes you're just sort of sending another Excel spreadsheet which is not bad per se, but that is a version that becomes obsolete when another version is out and the whole thing becomes confused. So there are ways that you're duplicating processes and duplicating information that can cause sort of confusion. And when you're mapping these things out, you get a clear picture of where these points might be happening and how you can potentially integrate these points better or share information better in ways that doesn't necessarily involve risky data duplication. This is where you start identifying redundancies and overlaps. Are there things that you can standardize? And obviously, another huge perspective in this is change management, obviously across organizations, because sometimes people's roles will change when you start thinking about how business processes might change as well, and leadership buy-in and how to obtain it. All of these things they sound sort of like disconnected things when you really think about it, but they're fundamental when you start working on these types of undertakings and how you're going to sort of weave all of these seemingly disconnected pieces together to come up with something that is as harmonized and integrated as possible that would ultimately be reflected to those people who are going to sort of consume the outputs of the system you're building. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think that if I'm going to summarize, it's harder to push the integration boundaries. It's easier to stay within our little area, and that's what we often do. We do what's easy. But if we look back to our user experience in reducing the mismatched systems, we need to do that hard work, and that's my takeaway. So great thoughts on that. Next we have Widjai. Go ahead. Your thoughts.
Thank you. When attending this meeting, there's some things that we hear a lot, and those things are essential to prioritize. One, transparency, collaboration, and adaptability. We hear a lot about collaboration and transparency throughout the process to achieve a parliamentary-wide efficiency and effectiveness. Let's think about timeline and phases. To develop a realistic timeline and plan for phases implementation. And the second one is a pilot program. Implementing pilot programs to test processes integration on smaller scale before rolling it out parliament-wide that allows the adjustment and refinements based on real-world feedback. That's it. It's 1 minute.
Okay, I owe you something after for keeping us so on track, Widjai. Thank you for the brief but insightful comments. Fotios, over to you.
Yes, also very interesting topic. I will try to answer a little bit differently. When it comes to business processes, I don't think that it might be appropriate, if done correctly, to keep the same processes as we move on with digitalization. The problem is that usually a lot of parliaments, but also this is true for other public organizations, they're digitizing bureaucracy. So they're keeping always the same procedures and processes, and they're trying to create an analog on the digital in the digital sphere. In principle, if done right, all processes have to change, or at least be amended in order to be digital ready. So this is why we need to adopt, if possible, a wider, a more holistic approach, if the word is correct, meaning that we have to reconsider the whole system of governance, the whole parliamentary system of doing things within our organizations, and then try to build systems that are fit for purpose, and not vice versa. Build systems on the existing structures and procedures. Thank you.
Wow, Fotios, that's going to stay with me, and I think the audience is digitizing bureaucracy. Very, very poignant. Thank you for the courage to mention that, because I think we've all seen it. Over to Djaka for your comments on this.
Terima kasih. Jadi saya kira poin pentingnya tadi ya, ada yang namanya digitasi dan digitalisasi gitu ya. Jangan sampai kita kejebak dalam proses digitasi gitu. Birokrasi tadi cuma semuanya digitalisasi itu. Nah, itu bisa menjadi masalah. Nah, untuk pengalaman, kita punya pengalaman di DPR ini, karena kan seringkali kita tidak berada dalam situasi yang ideal gitu ya. Kita mempunyai kesempatan untuk membangun secara keseluruhan, secara serentak gitu. Pengalaman di kita pada saat digitalisasi itu memang tidak semuanya dilakukan itu, tidak secara serentak, secara komprehensif itu ya, yang sebelumnya kita lakukan, sehingga akhirnya menjadi masalah ketika proses digitalisasi itu sudah berjalan jauh, itu ada kerumitan di situ. Makanya di kita alhamdulillah syukur kita udah punya yang namanya master plan ya, atau rencana induk pengembangan teknologi informasi. Dari situlah kita bisa menata ulang lagi keseluruhan proses yang ada. Sehingga saat ini kita punya pengalaman yang sebelumnya kita punya aplikasi ya, di mana aplikasi itu pasti di situ ada proses bisnis, itu ada sampai 120 yang kita punya ya, karena kita bangun sejak tahun 2010 ya, itu ada 120 aplikasi. Dengan rencana induk tadi, dasarnya master plan tadi, kita jadikan atau kita simplifikasikan fungsi-fungsi yang sejenis, fungsi-fungsi yang sama kita satukan. Sehingga itu sekarang ini kita sedang lagi bangun ya, hanya menjadi tinggal hanya 15 aplikasi. Dengan demikian nanti tentu tadi prosesnya tidak lagi digitasi tapi sudah digitalisasi. Di samping itu juga dalam proses itu yang paling penting pengalaman dari DPR itu kita selalu mengidentifikasikan kebutuhan dengan melibatkan pengguna ya, unit kerja atau user ya. Itu kita dari divisi IT kita melibatkan diskusi secara intensif dengan pengguna unit kerja. Selain itu juga menjadikan IT sebagai enabler, bagian dari strategi organisasi. Dengan demikian tentu kita harapkan proses-proses bisnis yang kita lakukan yang nanti teraplikasi dalam dalam aplikasi, terwujudkan dalam aplikasi, itu benar-benar akan bisa membantu proses-proses kerja organisasi, baik tadi ya di DPR maupun di Sekretariat Jenderal, itu bisa di supporting system itu bisa dilaksanakan dengan lebih baik lagi, sehingga tadi proses-proses kerja kita bisa lebih cepat, lebih efisien, lebih ekonomis, dan lebih akurat. Saya kira itu, Christopher.
Well, Djaka, it's very insightful of how you've placed harmonization of business processes directly on your digital optimization path. The two are intertwined, and so great job on that blueprint and the vision and the leadership to support that. And last, Jonathan, round out the discussion. Your thoughts.
Yep, it's always, again, hard being last. So I'll try to keep it sort of short as well. I think I'd sort of like to sort of discuss a little bit of a different sort of aspect as well, similar to Fotios as well around this. So the problem with, potentially with business processes, and we've all seen this with every single parliament and probably within your own parliaments, is that business processes, unless you're talking about, say, HR or, what I call common processes, are usually siloed. And it's for a very specific process within the parliament. And I think, one of the sort of challenges we have with that is that usually they have that business process, or they develop a solution to, solve or make things a bit more efficient around that particular business process. And that's all they care about, which is fine in some respects. So, but what I sort of think is that one of the sort of core pillars that we need to really consider when we look at business process and the harmonization of that is really about developing an overall strategy. Developing a strategy is really, I think, quite fundamental to understanding what those sort of, what your business processes are, what are the issues with those, etc. as well. Then I sort of follow that up with education. So if you've got the strategy, then let's educate the users, educate the consumers so they don't go off and create their own little solutions, educate them so we can manage those business processes as a collective, instead of people doing things solo or, doing things on their own as well. And, the best way of doing that is really about then active communication. We were working with a parliament where we had two houses of parliament and doing very similar things. So they had a database with some information in it, and they were capturing pretty much exactly the same thing on both sides. Nobody knew that the other side had exactly the same thing. They'd all spent taxpayers' money doing exactly the same thing, and they've on 2 different platforms, 3 different types of technology. And then it was IT's problem to then support it, solve it, fix it. We've probably all been here and we've probably all done it as well. And, I think the key thing for us, when we look at business process is strategy, education, communication.
Great way to end the panel discussion on that question. Thank you, Jonathan. Very, very insightful. I think the next topic, the next question is going to be a great segue from the last one, and it's all around governance. We talked about the need to do things better together across organizations. How do we govern enterprise processes instead of, like Jonathan mentioned, those silos that inevitably emerge in our organizations? So I'll read my speech here so you guys can orient yourselves in the question. To effectively oversee improvements to integrating mismatched systems, decision authorities in parliaments will need more attention and consideration. Service departments often govern their own systems and may have contributed to elements of mismatched systems we have today. As we look forward, what governance models may we consider to ensure effective oversight? And we'll start with Widjai on this one.
Thank you, Christopher. It's very important to adopt a comprehensive and collaborative approach of governance model. There are several governance models, but I will go in 2 of them only. There are so many, but I'm looking for like centralized governance model. Under this model, a centralized authority, such as a dedicated department or a committee, is responsible for overseeing the integration of mismatched system across various service departments. Now, what are the advantages of this? It ensures consistency and alignment with overarching goals and centralized decision-making. It can be particularly useful when there is a need for standardized process and data sharing. Another model is also the collaborative governance model that we can also look at. This approach emphasizes collaboration among service departments themselves with a minimal central oversight. Departments can work together to identify integration needs and implement solutions. Let's look at the advantages of that. It fosters a sense of ownership and expertise within departments, leading to more tailored solution that can be efficient when departments have a high degree of domain expertise. Regardless of the model chosen, transparency, accountability, and stakeholders engagement should be integral to the governance framework to ensure effective oversight and successful integration of mismatched systems.
Thank you, Widjai. Great way to start the panel discussion off. So over to Djaka to comment on that.
Ya, terima kasih, Christopher. Jadi kalau untuk ini kita cerita pengalaman eksperimen kita ya di DPR, itu memang ada pilihan-pilihan ya bagaimana kebijakan tata kelola ini diterapkan itu dilakukan. Kalau untuk di DPR kita sampai hari ini memang kita lakukan dengan sistem yang tersentralisasi, terpusat di unit yang kita ada namanya pusat teknologi informasi, di mana setiap divisi, setiap unit kerja ketika mau mengusulkan aplikasi baru atau pengembangan itu memang harus menyampaikan, mengusulkan lewat pusat teknologi informasi, di mana kita sudah ada regulasi bahwa setiap usulan itu harus ada dilengkapi oleh dasar-dasar pertimbangan ya, ketika mau mengusulkan aplikasi baru atau juga melakukan pengembangan itu dasarnya apa, pertimbangannya apa. Itu nanti akan kita uji, akan kita diskusikan dengan pengusul, sehingga nanti ada kesesuaian antara sistem secara umum ya, secara yang terpusat tadi dengan unit-unit yang ada yang terpisah gitu. Dengan demikian maka tentu kita tadi kita punya yang namanya roadmap itu ya. Roadmap itu juga menjadi dasar sebetulnya bagi unit kerja maupun bagi pusat teknologi informasi untuk menentukan atau menetapkan tata kelola yang akan kita terapkan di DPR. Saya kira itu, Christopher.
Thank you, Djaka. So I'm seeing two themes come out from the first two panelists around centralization and a strategy to ensure, we're having oversight over these mismatched systems. So that's great. Let's see what Jonathan has to say on the matter.
I'm not going to go against the trend. So centralized, we always sort of think that there should be some sort of level of what we call like an oversight committee or an oversight governance board that really their sort of key role is, it can comprise of, say, even stakeholders, key stakeholders, and then from that point, it's really about providing the governance, providing like risk assessments, providing, those sort of actual actively areas, for example, even if you look at AI, the ethical guidance, and those sort of other things as well. And I think, you have a sort of responsibility if you do centralize, that you can then sort of, what I was sort of saying in my last sort of answer around, you can then validate your strategy, validate your education, validate your communication as well, and I think with those sort of policies in place, it becomes, really, really sort of important, when you then look at that. The other sort of aspect as well, look at from governance, is really about measurability as well. So measurable outcomes are really important on any type of project. So, if you do then conduct, say, regular audits, have people then gone against the policy or those other things as well, to assess the performance, assess that they're actually following those sort of policies. Have we sort of performed impact assessments, or does this actually, and I've seen so many projects, and again, this is not just in Parliament, this is across any organization, that they have a project, they implement it, then they go live with it and they move on, but it's in support, but they really haven't actually thought about how do we actually measure something as being successful. It was a really interesting debate we had, well, it was my sort of last night, but around Hansard and, around word error rates. And we were talking with the Estonian Parliament with them, and they actually had measurable statistics to say, when we implemented this with artificial intelligence, they saw a increase, in efficiency of between, say, 20 to 25%, or, 10 to 15% 15%. And that sort of really struck me and said, I think it is really important from a governance point of view that, you know, there's no point in going ahead with a project unless it has a clear outcome and it's going to be successful. You know, you don't want to just put it under the carpet and go, well, this is now a cumbersome project and you've got to replace it in a year's time. Like, have measurable outcomes and to make it a successful governance option.
I love what you did there, Jonathan. So we're shifting the conversation in this question. You know, we still have centralization as a theme, but we need to measure our success. Measurability is loud and clear from your message. Thank you for that. Sabrina, your thoughts on this?
That's hard to be after Jonathan. I am not, full disclosure that I'm not necessarily an expert on data governance model, and I'm sure there are lots of different ones and sort of intersection and blends and hybrids and all of that. That said, when I'm thinking also that perhaps sort of different parliamentary models might influence how certain governance models actually pan out and how they work in practice, and our considerations. That said, what I have in mind, or what I would think of, I align and I agree with the centralization, because I think it's fundamental to have sort of an oversight or a view that is able to sort of implement and standardize and also determine metrics and what success looks like ultimately. And that's one of sort of the first questions when I work with clients here is, well, what does success look like? A lot of times, you know you have a problem and there's a problem that you would like to solve or something you would like to improve. And without necessarily going into the how or the what we're going to do to improve it, it's in your mind, what would a successful outcome look like? Then we can start thinking about how we're going to get there. And I think one of the things when it comes to data governance that I would advocate for, and under a centralized model, whatever model would look like, is a certain cross-functional aspect, and that could be the oversight committee or something that, like Jonathan mentions. And the idea in my mind is really to have committees from different parts of the organization that have representatives from other departments that have shared interests, but sometimes might also have tension between those interests that you might want to resolve or address in your governance model. And I think, you have legal that might have, a specific set of interests that they need to advocate for that might be somewhat different from IT. And then you have risk that's going to have its own evaluations, particularly when we start thinking about AI models and how we're going to use that data. Is there any inadvertent bias in it? Is there any? So all of this information, I think having it evaluated or considered by these cross-functional groups is going to give you probably a unique perspective and understanding of how data is used, how these different pieces of the organization view it and interact with it, and how they see a strategy for improving how data is managed, how data is governed, and how data is shared across the organization. And this is sort of a stewardship model, a stewardship approach, where these groups, I suppose, would be able to come together and really sort of negotiate what a governance model would look that could be enforced. And that's sort of how I would probably approach this. Again, not being an expert in these different governance models, but I think having sort of this strategy that cuts across the organization so that you have something that considers the different pieces and how they interpret their interactions and other interactions with data would inform something that's probably easier to align across the organization, but also probably easier to get buy-in for once you are able to sort of put forward, well, we've consulted across the organization. This is our strategy based on all of these interests. This is what we're going to move forward with, and this is how we plan on evolving over time as these change, because we also have to make sure that we've come up with something that is flexible enough to account for changes we can't even imagine at this point in time. And again, especially when it comes to adopting and implementing AI models and large language models.
Such a great suggestion. I think that as we're evolving through this panel, every comment is enriching the thoughts of the previous. So Sabrina, great insights of breaking yet another potential silo around a governance through a committee-based check and balance to make sure we're getting the full opinions and insights of the organization's interests in mind. Brilliant. Keeping with the time, Fotios, please finish off this question around governance.
Yes, I think it's an important feature of such systems to know how they can be managed and how oversight can look like. I don't think, though, that this is unrelated to the wider concept of how you regulate AI, because as we are moving towards the future, more smart systems are coming in. So they're not the dumb systems that we all had in the past. So where you needed exclusively IT capabilities and understanding to manage them. Now they start becoming more complex, ethical aspects coming in, but also other types of aspects, maybe political aspects of cybersecurity, maybe also political aspects, espionage, and so on. So I think that some sort of committee-based system needs to be established. That I don't think you can come around this. Possibly a commission system, so a mixed MPs and expert system, potentially with the participation of extra parliamentary participants and experts. So that might be something that could work, but at the same time, this would be something that needs to be assessed individually. I don't think there will be two parliaments that will share the same opinion about how you could establish such governance systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Great way to summarize that was such a great question on governance, Fotios. So I think the next round, and I'll just, before I introduce the next round, we have 2 more rounds. So that's about 30 minutes. I think Luis will be pleased. We're somewhat on time. So depending how brief we are with our 3 minutes, we may still have time for questions from the audience. So a reminder to our audience, you can use the chat, and time permitting, we may have a more interactive way to address your question through audio and video to the panel. So folks on the panel, please, let's keep this great momentum. And without further ado, I'll introduce the 4th round, which is around data. We heard it before. Let's dive into data. You know, we talk AI, the conference theme is artificial intelligence. There's no artificial intelligence without data. So let's speak about data. Our systems, these mismatched ones we're speaking of, enable the flow and house extremely valuable parliamentary data. Getting access to this data to make informed decisions to improve our services is essential. In a mismatched system environment, extracting, translating, and leveraging this wealthy enterprise data has proven to be a challenge for most organizations, including parliaments. What opportunities may we consider for enabling improved data-driven decision-making for our organizations? And to start this off, Jonathan, over to you.
It's a bit of a loaded question, I think. So I'll try to sort of start it off with a bit of the way we try to sort of look at data, and especially around data-driven decision-making as well. One of the inherent issues with parliamentary data is that parliaments have been around for a very long time. And they've gone through a lot of different iterations, you know, of that data as well. And one of the things we've always sort of encountered when we've been working with parliaments is actually sometimes the quality of a data, you know, and it might be incorrect dates. It might be the way which was a system was originally designed. It was just in an Excel spreadsheet. And, you know, what you perceive to be a date, and then when you try to then use it as a date, is very different. And so what we always find is that when we look at data itself, is that there's always going to be a phase to really make it truly valuable for like real data decision-making processes. Like I'll use the sort of analogy of what Sabrina sort of said was, you know, people will send an Excel spreadsheet and then, well, which one's then the source of truth? There's going to be a new version, there's going to be an outdated version, etc. And depending on who you're actually talking to, they think they've got the source of truth, that other person thinks, you know, they've got the source of truth, and it becomes really quite messy really quite quickly. So for me, I think centralized data management is really important. And also regular sort of checks and balances around data and cleansing of that data as well. You know, I think, you know, there's a sort of a traditional viewpoint where you know, parliaments have to, they consider like the data has to be kept forever and eternity, but there are actually subsets of our data which may not need to be as well. So we want to make sure that whatever data that we're actually keeping, using, is as clean as we can, obviously as accurate as we can. And again, this is all, you know, that sort of is, you know, potentially a resourcing thing, or a, you know, because especially if you're dealing with, you know, hundreds of millions of records effectively, it can be obviously quite a intense task to actually do. But I think, you know, to make informed decisions, you need to make sure though that you do understand what data do you have available to you, and what is actually the source of truth for that data as well.
Great way to kick it off and take the loaded, fully loaded question and break it down, Jonathan. Okay, next we have Fotios, please.
Thank you. This is the sort of holy grail question, or the $1 million question. So how do you enable data-driven decision-making in parliament or generally in governance? I think you can have a few PhD studies around this. Obviously, you need to have first of all validated data. So somehow parliaments need to take care of the quality of their data. Not all data that is published is clean, or let's say have a sufficient quality. There are, of course, several types of data quality. I don't want to get into this. So let's start with this. Having sufficient quality data is something that you certainly have to begin with. Then there's the talk about the systems and what kind of applications are you letting work with this data. So here is what AI coming into play. And when you start debating AI, there opens at the same time countless possibilities, options, but also dangers. So we get back again to the governance of all these systems. So it's a very complicated and fluid area that is constantly evolving. I would say that, and I don't think that I'm reinventing the wheel here. This is something that each parliament has to consider itself. Of course, it can be supported in these decisions by peers, other parliaments that has good relations with, or the IPU, which has an open data hub. So there is guidance around. There are people like ourselves that can participate in the building of a global parliamentary community of practice, supporting other parliaments who perform better and better. But the parliaments, I think, they won't come around having to invest a lot in local capacities, systems, and in order to really push forward their capabilities, their digital capabilities. Thank you.
Great insights as always, Fotios, and thank you for those suggestions, such as IPU Data Hub and other constructs around our parliaments that we could look to for guidance, leveraging, etc. So appreciate your thoughts on that. Over to Widjai next.
Oh, sorry, I was focused on the answer of Fotios. I want to revert to two opportunities and strategies to consider. The first one is data accessibility. When we develop user-friendly interfaces and self-service portals, that will make data more accessible to parliamentarians and staff, but also ensure that the data is available in various formats, such as structured data tables, visualizations, and also interactive reports. The second one is scalability and future proofing. Build a system and process that can scale and with the growth the growing volume of data and involving technology trends. Also, stay up to date with emerging data technologies and best practices. That are the two opportunities and strategies that we can consider if it's about data.
Thank you for that, Widjai. Keeping the momentum, let's check in with Djaka on his thoughts around this.
Ya, terima kasih Christopher. Jadi saya kira semuanya sepakat ya betapa pentingnya data bagi lembaga parlemen gitu ya. Karena dengan data itu sebetulnya kita bisa dalam perdebatan-perdebatan dengan pemerintah atau dengan government itu kita bisa beradu data gitu ya. Nah, problemnya itu tadi. Sebetulnya masalah sekarang bukan data yang terbatas, tapi data yang sangat melimpah, luar biasa. Tapi tentu data itu harus benar-benar dipastikan bahwa data itu valid gitu ya, data itu benar. Makanya saya kira penting di setiap parlemen, seperti di DPR kita juga punya big data ya. Data-data tadi bisa berasal dari internal dan juga eksternal. Dari data yang banyak tadi kita bisa klasifikasikan, kita bisa cleansing, kita bisa bersihkan data-data tadi sehingga menjadi data yang kita cukup pastikan bahwa data itu reliable, data itu valid. Gitu ya. Dari data itulah nanti ada proses-proses yang nanti saya kira bisa menggunakan artificial intelligence untuk mendapatkan relasi-relasi dari data-data yang kita ada. Sehingga ini akan menjadi sangat penting. Untuk itu barangkali salah satu yang harus dilakukan memang harus ada yang namanya proses standarisasi data ya. Sesuai dengan prinsip atau sesuai dengan kesepakatan-kesepakatan yang diambil dan juga ada metadata dan strukturnya. Jadi untuk itu barangkali memang harus punya tim data yang kuat ya, tim data yang kuat yang didukung oleh beragam keahlian-keahlian ya. Selain IT juga ada ahli di bidang statistik, di bidang manajemen data, di bidang data engineering, data data science itu ya. Itu saya kira proses yang harus dilakukan supaya nanti itu kita mempunyai kecukupan data yang kuat dan selalu bagi saya yang paling penting sebetulnya supaya kita punya data pembanding ya, second opinion terhadap data-data yang dimiliki, dipunyai oleh pemerintah. Itu tantangannya saya kira. Karena sebetulnya anggota parlemen itu juga sebetulnya bisa ya mendapatkan data-data yang dia dapatkan dari daerah pemilihannya. Itu saya kira sangat bernilai ya, sangat berharga. Tinggal bagaimana itu kita dikelola menjadi data-data yang sangat penting dan sangat dibutuhkan. Saya kira itu, Christopher.
Thank you, Djaka. I couldn't empathize and agree with you more on specialized skill sets, data scientists, and I'll speak. I haven't spoken a lot about the House of Commons of Canada as the moderator here, but I thought I'll inject a quick thought. Is we're on the same path as you are in terms of realization of if we were wishing to launch higher functioning AI assisted capabilities in this organization, when we look within at the root of our data strategy, we are seeing some gaps in terms of skill sets, foundational elements from both a technology and governance and all the things we've discussed here today perspective. So there's so many great follow-ups I'd like to have with some of you and in your thoughts of how you're tackling these great contemplations. But alas, we must carry on. And Sabrina, please round out the discussion on data.
My turn to be last. I'll try to keep it very short though, because everybody has provided such great insight. And I'll say something that weaves into a lot of the things I've been saying, but is maybe a little bit different. And I'll go back to sort of talking about cross-functional or collaborative cultures when it comes to improving data-driven decision-making. And I think that we talked about data sharing, and sort of the pitfalls that you can come across in data sharing when you don't necessarily have that single source of truth and things become obsolete or there's confusion around what's current, who owns it, who manages it. So when it comes to that point of view, you know, having single source of truth and sort of people who own that and are responsible for managing it and communicating it and disseminating it and exposing it, whether that's, you know, sharing, whether it's via APIs, whatever works. I think that having that collaborative culture really involves a cultural shift towards collaboration and data sharing among or across departments and stakeholders. And I don't think that's necessarily just in a parliamentary setting. It's in different projects that I've worked on in other institutions as well, where integration or collaboration is something that's key, but people measure or share data in different ways without necessarily having had this collaboration to what's valuable for all of us, how can we manage it and make decisions based on all of these data points that are important across our respective departments. And I think that that's sort of one of the valuable points of views when it comes to you know, considering data integration and how we're going to standardize things across, you know, across these departments. Are we actually measuring the same things or keeping track of the same things and have the same data? We're just naming it differently. If we do name it differently, well, is there a way that we can standardize it? And standardization has come up as well. Can we have a naming convention that works across all of our organizations? You know, a taxonomy or again, whatever approach you would take is something that hopefully you could come across collaboratively, or that might be a data warehouse or a data lake where you can consolidate all of that information so that it's something that you can analyze more efficiently, you know, across departments. So to keep it short, I really think that there's integration into a broader strategy that has to involve collaboration, you know, aspects of governance, quality assurance, you know, security, obviously, but really part of a collaborative sort of organizational culture. And I think that solving the challenges of this mismatched sort of data management really requires this sort of multifaceted approach, where you can get many perspectives and sort of figure out what's valuable across organizations and how to measure it and make decisions based on that.
Thank you. Great job with the hardest spot on the panel in the final. So great standardization, garbage in, garbage out. Quality needs to drive things forward if we're going to rely on this data, right? So thank you, Sabrina. And respecting the time, fifth, final question. Thank you for all your endurance on this one, panelists. Platforms. Let's talk about a little more about the technology now, the platforms which are going to power the future here. As service providers focus on optimizing costs, reducing the burden of lifecycle management of a plethora of mismatched systems, platforms have often been considered an effective strategy to address multiple business needs with fewer systems and overhead. While the trade-off often sees a reduction of specialized functionality for specific business needs, which is the traditional reason for having so many mismatched systems in the first place. Looking forward, what is the right balance of platforms and specialized systems for our parliaments? And we'll start with Fotios.
Thanks. That's, I mean, for technologists, this is the most important question: how to do this. I won't be general in my response. I will try to explain what we are doing with our friends and colleagues within our team, the Hellenic OCR team, which is a global effort for the digitization and study of parliamentary data. So what we did after lots of years of studies, we decided that possibly one of the most efficient ways to integrate different systems in a technology agnostic way. So you don't know what's coming in a few years now. So so how to integrate or to foresee future integration. So we decided that we would use a rather old, 20 years ago technology, around enterprise integration systems. So this is in principle, when one is using software agents, they used to be called bots, in order to communicate between or mediate between different systems. So in principle, you have on a back end, you have different systems sitting in. Each of these systems is translating the internal, let's say, language it understands in a common language. So you need a common language, just like we're here from Greece, from Canada, from Indonesia, and we're talking English. So you need the systems to talk English. So a common language. What would this be? So currently, one can figure out that the most established systems nowadays is Komantoso. So this is an XML-based markup language, and you can use any type of a Komantoso-based language for the systems to communicate. So this is, of course, an idea. We have established some proofs of concept. It works in practice. We are experimenting with similar systems as well. And the main idea behind all this is that all this is more or less open sourced. This would mean that not only one vendor will be able to do this integration, but several ones can adjust their systems into a common language scheme, so that they can be integrated much easier than in the past. I hope this makes sense. In any case, it works, and we will try to have some related publications in the future. There are some already. If you're just Googling this, you will find our recent presentations on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Fotios, for giving us a real concrete, relevant, real-world example. It's always nice to anchor from our own unique vantage point, so I appreciate your comment there. Next on platforms, Djaka, over to you.
Ya, terima kasih. Jadi di parlemen kami semua sistem aplikasi kita gunakan dengan berbasis web ya. Dan kenapa kita berbasis web ini dipilih karena memang ada beberapa faktor yang kita pertimbangkan. Salah satunya yaitu ada kemudahan dan kecepatan dalam pembuatan sistem. Ini kenapa kita semua aplikasi yang kita ada di parlemen, di DPR itu menggunakan berbasis web. Selain itu juga ada kemudahan dalam pembaruan sistem. Updating cukup dilakukan pada server untuk semua pengguna. Karena memang dinamikanya, perkembangannya itu sangat tinggi sekali sehingga updatingnya bisa dilakukan untuk di server dan itu bisa berlaku atau bisa digunakan untuk seluruh pengguna. Selain itu juga pengguna dapat mengakses aplikasi dari manapun selama ada jaringan internet. Saya kira ini sudah menjadi sudah menjadi praktek umum gitu. Dan memang anggota parlemen di Indonesia itu juga tersebar memang sampai ke pelosok-pelosok ya. Sepanjang itu ada internet dia masih bisa melakukan aktivitas-aktivitas yang terkait dengan parlemen. Saat ini kami sedang melakukan penyederhanaan sistem ya, dari jumlah yang tadi kita sampaikan. Sebelumnya aplikasi kita itu ada sekitar 120, ini sekarang kita clustering, kita kelompokkan pada yang fungsi-fungsi yang sama ya, sehingga nanti tinggal hanya menjadi 15. Sehingga dengan demikian ini akan mempermudah kita dalam melakukan maintenance dan juga pengembangannya tidak akan sulit. Untuk terkait dengan pertukaran data ya, karena ini semuanya yang kita omongin ini, yang kita bicarakan nanti ujung-ujungnya bagaimana sebetulnya terjadi pertukaran data gitu ya. Untuk pertukaran data, platform yang akan dikembangkan yang dikembangkan di DPR itu kita sudah menggunakan microservice untuk interoperabilitas data antar layanan. Sehingga keuntungannya apabila terjadi perubahan layanan dari suatu organisasi tidak perlu mengubah keseluruhan layanan, tapi cukup fungsi khusus yang dilakukan perubahan. Jadi saya kira ini yang baru ya, yang kita terapkan sekarang, kita kembangkan dengan menggunakan microservices itu, sehingga perubahan-perubahan tadi, karena kita orientasinya pada user ya, pada pengguna, pada departemen-departemen yang berbeda, itu apabila ada perubahan-perubahan itu akan bisa kita lakukan dengan menggunakan teknologi microservices. Saya kira itu, Christopher. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Djaka. And once again, yet your strategy and blueprint have come full circle in this panel, this discussion, and clearly the strategy of consolidation of specialized mismatched systems down to from over 100 to 15-ish is remarkable. I must say we're very jealous here in Canada of such success of consolidation and platform-driven approach. So great work there. Next, I will shift over to Widjai. Your comments, please.
Thank you, Chris. On this topic, I always think about, do we need a platform with all solutions, or are we looking at different solutions with different softwares? But the most important thing is interoperability. That is a very heavy word, but ensure that the chosen system, whether it's a platform or a specialized system, can effectively communicate and integrate with each other. And this interoperability is very crucial to avoid data silos and ensure seamless information flow between different systems. But also to keep in mind is cost considerations. We have to evaluate the total cost of ownership, including licensing, implementation, maintenance, and support for both platform and specialized system. Determine which options offers the most cost-effective solution in the long term. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Widjai. Such a great, concise, but clear message. We really appreciate that. Sabrina, over to you.
I'll try and keep it short, but I think that the balance has pieces of considerations that everyone expressed. And keeping in mind sort of there's a backdrop where parliaments, governments as well are in this context of having these specific constraints, legal constraints, accountability constraints, taxpayer money funded. All of these are constraints around how systems are purchased, how they're implemented, how they're delivered. And these have to be considerations that inform sort of architectural and delivery considerations. And I think a lot of it has to sort of center around some of the outcomes or the competing outcomes in many cases that parliaments are sort of grappling with. And like Widjai just said, a major consideration is driving down costs. And it's not for IT departments, for parliaments, for institutions in general. And it's not a weakness. It's a structural issue. And that might compete with certain outcomes that parliaments are organized with. And it's something that we see in different projects beyond just parliaments, is that one sort of driving factor is cost needs to be driven down, but another one is that, well, we need all of these outcomes. We need to do this faster. We need to be able to exchange this information in a more integrated way. And these are things that you on a very practical level need to balance out when you're making these decisions about platforms and how you move forward in building out these systems. And, when there's a situation where you have an outcome of driving down costs and keeping the lights on versus, improving efficiency in X, Y, Z verticals, then, you have to figure out how you're going to balance these. And that plays into other things like, integration capabilities, or, what are these core functions that you can settle on versus these highly specialized needs that might need to be managed differently for a certain amount of time. So there's a lot of balance, and there's a lot of trade-offs based on your bottom line cost-driven implications, and also the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve, and what it takes, the gap between your current situation and sort of what it takes to achieve those outcomes that you want. And you might have to sort of consider a roadmap towards getting there that would factor in sort of small increments of improvement, depending on the context within which you operate. And that can be economic, geographical, social. There's a lot of factors to consider in this. And the balancing act is not something that's necessarily very simple, and needs to be calculated in many senses from different stakeholders, and also the context of how parliaments operate.
Wow, very well said, Sabrina. I think you're making Jonathan's job the hardest, because he's not just finishing this question, but the whole panel itself in a way. So Jonathan, please, your insights.
No pressure. So I'd like to sort of resonate, especially like with what Widjai was saying, and Djaka and Sabrina. When we sort of look at platforms, and I think like when we look at mismatched systems, parliaments have got legacy systems. There's, every single parliament will probably not just have one system in place. So therefore, when you're looking at a platform, microservices, as an example, interoperability, based on common standards such as Open API or REST-based services, or, common authentication methods, right? Not necessarily Windows authentication, looking for more that sort of more what I call cloud native, authentication these days is really critical to choosing a successful, platform. Because, if you implement a new system, which doesn't interoperate with your existing systems, you're just creating another mismatched system. And you're just adding it to the list, like at the end of the day. And it does become really important. Like for I'll give you an example, and this is, again, another recent example. If you go on to, again, I won't name a specific parliament, but we do microservices, for example, for public websites, and where we actually expose some of our platform to their public website. But if you actually go to their parliamentary website, you would never ever know, that 3/4 of their website is actually done by us. 1/4 of their website is actually done by Sitecore or another sort of content management system as well, and you would never ever know. And I think like where we sort of talk about interoperability, compatibility, etc., those sort of things also have to be then seamless to the end user, which I think is a really another sort of important fact. I think, it's sort of like, I think we do also have a question, from the audience as well. So would you like me to sort of just put my 2 cents into that as well?
Yeah, and actually to make it interactive, in real time, we just got the question from the audience. They have courage and wish to pose it to us, and for everyone's benefit on video. So
excellent.
We'll invite them now to ask the question. And Jonathan, yes, absolutely, you'll get first crack at it.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm happy to be last. So.
And just keeping also a reminder on the time, we don't have a lot of time left, so we really do appreciate this question. And I think if there's any others, please use the chat or your raise hand feature, and we'll try to address it. So please, over to the question from Malaysia.
Okay, so my name is Mas Liza. I'm a research officer from Parliament of Malaysia. So I'm just going to say it again, my question on the chat box. So I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, something that I've been thinking about. With all of this data available and Parliament now able to use artificial intelligence in analyzing the data, what are the panelists' comments? It's open to any one of you. On the possibility of this data being misused in the sense that it will be biased towards a certain political agenda. So how do you think we can avoid this from happening? That would be my question. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, I'll divide this into. I'll try to stick to about a minute. So what I sort of like to do is sort of separate the data into two components. One is internal data, and one is external data. External data, to answer the question, it can happen absolutely, without any issue, without any sort of thought. It will happen, and it's also happening right now. When we look at external data, you have political lobby groups, you have, them crawling the parliamentary website, extracting that data, trying to perform their own artificial intelligence over it, and trying to get little snippets of, little pieces of information to use for their political game as well. So that's the external side. When we look at the internal side, though, I sort of did a case presentation around the fundamental pillars of like good governance around artificial intelligence at the beginning of this week. And you can control, and if you have good governance around like an AI oversight committee, if you have good governance around understanding what your data is, how you can train it, and also understanding that it can be biased as well, and understanding what that bias could actually look like, and making sure that you're also then factoring in the data for, say, minority groups or disadvantaged groups as well, becomes really important into that fact. So monitoring, measuring, etc. for internal data and internal use of AI is a lot more within the Parliament's control. If it goes to your public website, whatever happens and whatever is consumed from that point is outside of your control. But if you're publishing factual, correct data to your public website, that I think ends your responsibility as a Parliament to manage that. Sorry, I think I went for about 2 minutes. Sorry. Yeah.
Great answer, Jonathan. Would any of the other panelists like to add to that, or again, once more, we have a minute or two left for another question. I see there's someone thinking about a question, perhaps, but while that's happening, any of our other panelists, would you like to comment on Masliza and Maslan's question? Widjai, go ahead.
Jonathan said it very briefly and very wide, but when we take AI in consideration, we still decide what we publish and what we keep in-house and publish for the public. We still decide, we still have the control of all data as for the parliamentarians, for the staff, and so let's keep that in mind, that that let AI not decide for us what must happen. We have to teach him what must be available for whom.
Thank you for playing devil's advocate on this, and the courage to ask such a great question. And while I'm looking at the time and respecting, of course, the precious time of our panelists and audience, I'd just like to thank everybody so much for the opportunity to share this great debate around mismatched systems and how we can tackle it from so many angles, from governance to the user experience, to the business processes, to the data and the technology behind it. There's so many facets to this. And clearly, if it was easy, we wouldn't need such a discussion today. But I think this panel brought some great insights for us to share and debate afterwards. And please don't be strangers. Let's be in touch together and help each other going forward. So once again, thank you today for this amazing shared insights today.